Hola, ¿cómo estás? Espero que estés súper bien. This is Tamara Marie, host of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Now, before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know about a special opportunity that you're definitely going to want to take advantage of, especially if your goal is to become fluent in Spanish. For a limited time only, my team is opening the doors to listeners of the podcast to take advantage of a free language coaching session. Now, in this session, it's not just we're teaching you about verbs or grammar, but we're really going to do a deep dive into what are your goals for learning Spanish, assess where you are on your journey to fluency at the moment, and help you map out a 90-day plan for how you can get to fluency. So we are going to help you take your Spanish to the next level, whether you're afraid of speaking Spanish or you just get a little bit nervous when you're talking to native speakers, or maybe you've got some of the basics down, but you really know that you struggle with getting your Spanish to flow and your listening skills aren't up to par. Whatever it is, even if it is a specific grammar issue, we will help you map out how to tackle that. And normally these sessions do cost, so we are offering a few slots for free. There are limited spaces available and they'll only be open up through the end of the month. So make sure you sign up. Go to SpanishConSalsa.com/coach. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/coach to book your free language coaching session where we will help you map out a 90-day plan to get to Spanish fluency. Okay, let's get started with the episode. It's Caribbean Spanish Month here on the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, and in this episode, we're going to explore the diversity of Caribbean Spanish. I'm going to dive into the rich history and cultural influences that shape the language spoken in the Caribbean region, including a few countries you might not expect. So whether you're a Spanish learner, a traveler, or a heritage language learner that wants to learn more about Spanish from the Caribbean region, this episode is for you. Entonces, vamos a empezar. Let's get started.
Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola y bienvenidos al episodio 176. Welcome to episode 176 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. In this episode, we're going to explore some of the diversity of Spanish spoken in the Caribbean. So while there are general characteristics of all Spanish spoken in the Caribbean, there are some things that are very specific to each different region where Caribbean Spanish is spoken. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a little bit more of the background about the countries where Caribbean Spanish is spoken, the different regions and cities within those countries, and give you a little bit of a glimpse into the history of each place. So let's talk about the Caribbean itself. Now, generally when we think about the Caribbean, we think of las islas, or the islands. But the Caribbean region is more than just the islands. Although it's definitely known for its beaches, the most beautiful beaches on the planet, I have to say. Its unique culture, and of course, the very different way in which Spanish is spoken there. Caribbean Spanish really is a distinct form of Spanish, and it is influenced by the history, the culture, and other languages that have impacted the region. So let's talk about exactly where people speak Caribbean Spanish. Like, what are we talking about when we say Caribbean? So first, I will look at the Dominican Republic. That's actually located on the eastern side of the island of Hispaniola. So the other part of that island is actually the country of Haiti. And a little known fact is that Haiti actually used to be the entire island, and then the Dominican Republic gained their independence from Haiti, and so they are a partial island nation. Santo Domingo is the capital, and it is the largest city in the Dominican Republic. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's one of the oldest European settlements in the Americas. So there's lots of Christopher Columbus energy in Santo Domingo. So you'll find some of those things there. And in fact, a lot of cities in the Caribbean look very similar. They have that very Spanish well, a lot of them are Spanish, some also Portuguese, some Dutch, but there's a lot of that sort of, old school Spanish architecture throughout the islands and throughout the Caribbean. The Dominican Republic is definitely known for its beaches, its music. So there's merengue, there's bachata, there's other music from Dominican Republic like dembow. So it's just known for having a very unique sound to its music. And also for the food, like there's sancocho, which is a stew, very famous, and mofongo, which is plantain. It's basically fried, double fried, and you'll find mofongo in other islands as well, and also sancocho. And it's really interesting that different countries and different regions have their own versions of these, of both sancocho and mofongo. Dominican Spanish is really spoken pretty fast. It has some very distinct expressions, and the pronunciation varies throughout the island. Some of it sounds a little bit closer to Puerto Rico. Some of it, if you're on the countryside, is going to have a little bit of a different flavor as well. So there's even different accents within the regions of Dominican Republic. The next place you probably think about when you are thinking about Caribbean Spanish is Puerto Rico, which is actually a U.S. territory, and it's in the northeastern part of the Caribbean. So the capital of Puerto Rico is San Juan, and that city in and of itself has a very rich history, including like the old San Juan area, which is very historic, very beautiful architecture there as well. Puerto Rico has a blend, like most places in the Caribbean, of both Spanish, so European Spanish influence, African influence, and the indigenous Taino tribes that were in Puerto Rico. The island itself is known a lot for its salsa music, its outdoor festivals like Fiestas de la Calle San Sebastián. It has these iconic landmarks like El Morro, which is the fort that is located in Old San Juan. And Puerto Rican Spanish itself has its own different vocabulary, quirks to its pronunciation, as well as anglicismo, so lots of words that come from the English language and its interaction with English. And we did discuss in a little bit more detail some Puerto Rican Spanish phrases a few weeks ago here on the podcast. So I'll include a link in the show notes to that episode, as well as some other episodes we've done to explore Puerto Rican Spanish greetings and just some other vocabulary from the island. So go to learnspanishconsalsa.com/176 for episode 176 of the podcast, and you'll find links to all those more specific episodes for Puerto Rico and the other islands that we have reviewed as well. Now, the next place that you probably think about when you're thinking about Caribbean Spanish is Cuba, or Cuba. That's actually the largest island in the Caribbean. And the capital of Cuba is Havana, or La Havana. And this city really has a lot of old school cars. So like those vintage, like 1950s cars. They're very colorful. The architecture there, again, very colonial, looks very similar to Old San Juan, looks very similar to some parts of Dominican Republic on the coast. And Cuban Spanish has its own rhythm too, which is different from other parts of the Caribbean. And Cuban people in general, like throughout the Caribbean really, but they have a reputation for being very warm and very friendly, very informal. And they're very much known for their fuerte café. So they have this strong coffee, which we would probably call espresso here in the United States. And there's also lots of different types of music. There's son, there's salsa, lots of different traditional music as well that comes from Cuba. So those are the three that you probably were most familiar with. But now I'm going to talk about a couple of places where Caribbean Spanish is spoken that you might not have thought about. One of those is Colombia. Now, many people don't realize that Colombia is in South America, but it actually does have a Caribbean coastline along its northern border. Cartagena is a very famous city in Colombia, has a lot of rich history. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You absolutely have to visit it to see the architecture there. It's very, very beautiful. And even though it's similar to other cities, I would say that Cartagena has something a little bit special about it. So it's that same sort of Spanish architecture. It's very colorful, but it seems to just be a lot more of it, a lot grander, a lot more variation. So you have to just see the city of Cartagena. And there's also other parts to the Colombian Caribbean. So that region also includes cities like Barranquilla and Santa Marta. They're both known for being more tropical, and they have a lot of Afro-Caribbean influences. There's an annual carnaval in Barranquilla, and it's one of the largest carnival celebrations in the world. So again, this is Colombia, and a lot of people think of Medellin, they think of the mountains in the center of the country or some of the jungles, but you don't really think about the island of Santa Marta or the coast where there's beautiful Cartagena and Barranquilla. And also, there is a lot of different language, different variations there. And the music, they have lots of different music in the Caribbean region of Colombia, but they also do have salsa, and salsa caleña, which is salsa from Cali, the city of Cali, is a very specific style of dance and music. It tends to be pretty fast-paced. So again, the country of Colombia also has some Caribbean Spanish there and some Caribbean cultural influence. Now, the next place that you probably don't think about when you think about Caribbean Spanish is Venezuela. Now, this country also is in South America, but it has a northern coast that is actually bordering the Caribbean Sea. Now, the capital of Venezuela is Caracas, and that's actually surrounded by mountains. But the Venezuelan Caribbean region includes cities like Maracaibo and La Guaira. They are known for their beautiful beaches, vibrant music, and of course, some amazing food. Arepas, which you might be familiar with, are very popular in the region, as well as cachapas and pabellón criollo. Those are just a few examples of the dishes that you can find in this region. And it's also important to note that, because both Cuba and Venezuela, if you're from the United States or maybe even from Canada, but Venezuela and Cuba both do have some limitations on tourism if you're coming from the U.S. Because of the political sort of dynamic. So the tourism industry has suffered a bit in Venezuela. But there are still countries that can visit and do visit. And it's something I want to explore in a future episode, because I think that this is a region that we don't think about a lot in the U.S. We don't really have as much interaction. However, there are a lot of Venezuelans who live in the diaspora and who live in other countries. In fact, when I went to Cartagena, I met a lot of people from Venezuela who had kind of crossed the border over to there. So it's important to really understand the region as well and the culture there. But they also have some amazing Caribbean Spanish culture in Venezuela and some islands as well. All right, now we're going to talk about a couple of other countries. So I don't know if you've thought about some of these, but I really want you to expand your view beyond just thinking of the few islands that you may be familiar with. And we're going to continue to explore more about the culture of these countries and their Caribbean regions on the podcast in the future. So let's talk about another country where you probably did not think about Caribbean Spanish, and that is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is actually located in Central America, and its capital is San Jose. That's also its largest city, and it's really an urban center. There's a lot of national parks and rainforests. Costa Rica is famous for its ecotourism. There's zip lining, there's jungle trips, volcanoes. They even have beaches, so there's a lot going on in Costa Rica. But when it comes to Caribbean Spanish, there's a specific region or city called Limón. And Limón is located on the eastern coast of Costa Rica, which faces the Caribbean Sea. It has a distinct cultural heritage and very much has an Afro-Caribbean flair. Limón is known for its festivals. There is a Carnaval de Limón, which has lots of costumes. It even has calypso music. There's reggae. And they also have delicious Afro-Caribbean cuisine. So in Limón, you actually do hear a unique blend of Spanish and English and some Creole accents that reflect the history of that region. So again, you may be familiar with going to the rainforest, and again, like I said, ecotourism in Costa Rica, but if you haven't been to the Caribbean side, it definitely is a different cultural flair. And again, we'll talk more about the Caribbean Spanish that's spoken in that region of Costa Rica in the future on the podcast. And lastly, there's another Central American country that you might not have thought about that actually does have a Caribbean region, and that is Panama. So Panama is famous, of course, for the Panama Canal. It's in Central America. It really connects Central and South America together and allows sort of ships to go through. So Panama City is just known for that. So there's lots of tourism there. However, there's also an Afro-Caribbean side to the culture. So if you go to a city like Bocas del Toro, which is a beach town, they're definitely known for a different way of speaking Spanish. And it does have a lot more of a Caribbean flair. Even in cities like Colón, there is definitely an influence of the different diverse ethnic makeup of Panama. So just like many other countries in the Caribbean and in Latin America in general, there is a mix of indigenous cultures and people as well as African and Spanish influence. So it really is a bit of a different culture if you're on the coast and you're in Bocas del Toro versus being in one of the main cities like in Panama City. So wow, there's really a lot more than we thought, right? We've got more than just Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic. We also have islands in Venezuela. We have the coast of Colombia. We have the Caribbean coast in Central America of both Panama and Costa Rica. So there is a lot broader influence of Caribbean Spanish than you may have thought. But I want to explore just a little bit as to why that is. Like, what is it that makes Caribbean Spanish so unique? Why is it so different than other types of Spanish? Why do people say it's so hard to understand Caribbean Spanish speakers? The Caribbean region has a complex history. It includes some ugly parts of our history like colonization and slavery, and also just the general migration during the colonial era of European powers such as Spain, England, and even the Dutch to different parts of the Caribbean. So all of these countries, they brought ships over, they established colonies in the region, and with them they brought their languages, including Spanish and English, and unfortunately, they also brought African slaves. The African slave trade played a significant role in shaping the Caribbean's cultural and linguistic heritage. So there were several African languages that were brought over when the European colonizers came. And those languages also brought certain cultural aspects in terms of music, food, identity. All of that was brought to the region of the Caribbean, which already had people living there. So there were also languages spoken by indigenous people, the Carib tribes, the Taino. They all kind of mixed together to form this unique cultural blend. And because these are also generally islands or coasts or places that are a little bit more isolated from other countries and other regions, it tends to just create this uniqueness. So it's like a definite mix of influences and circumstances that lend themselves to creating something that's very distinct and very unique. So the development of the Spanish spoken in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean is heavily influenced by Creole, by African languages. It really does result in a lot of unique vocabulary, pronunciation, and even grammatical patterns. So today, Caribbean Spanish really does reflect all of that rich history and cultural fusion. So you'll hear in the Caribbean African rhythms, indigenous words, and cultural expressions that really encompass the entire history of the people that have come to that region. Even to the point where in some countries in the Caribbean, in some areas, just like, a place like the United States where we have people from everywhere, you will find some of that influence in the food. Like even in the Dominican Republic, there is a large population from the Middle East, and you will sometimes find that some Dominican food that's traditionally Dominican does have a little bit of a Middle Eastern flair, a little bit of Lebanese flair, different things like that. So there's really, really a mix of culture, and it's really hard to tease out the source of everything. But it did create this beautiful, unique mix of heritage, of language, and of culture. So I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of the podcast and a little bit more of a deep dive into Caribbean Spanish. Again, this is Caribbean Spanish Month on the podcast. If you purchase one of our Caribbean Spanish ebooks. So currently we have available ebooks on our website, CaribbeanSpanish101.com. You can get a bilingual dictionary and phrase book from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, or from Cuba. And if you purchase one of our ebooks this month, not only are you going to have the ability to expand your vocabulary of Caribbean Spanish and hear the audio spoken by native speakers from the Caribbean of each and every word and phrase that we provide you with. And this is hundreds and hundreds of phrases that we have curated from native speakers from the Caribbean. But you'll also be entered, if you download an ebook by June 30th, you'll be entered into a giveaway automatically to win a free one-on-one language coaching session with one of our certified language coaches from El Caribe. So I hope you will take advantage of that and begin to expand your vocabulary, really tune your ear to the language, but also immerse yourself in Caribbean Spanish culture. As always, I hope something you heard in this episode will take you one step closer from Spanish principiante to bilingüe. Hasta la próxima.